Joining me now is media writer at the Australian newspaper, Sophie Elsworth, and Executive Director of the Institute of Public Affairs, Scott Hargraves. Welcome, Scott and Sophie. Now, Sophie, you have some breaking news for us. Amid all the financial uncertainty and rate rise pressures and inflation and everything else, there's one group that's getting a pay rise. Who is it, Soph?
That's right, James. So just breaking in the last hour, staff at SBS, so the publicly funded broadcaster, have just received a 9.5% pay rise over the next 3 years. And James, this comes just a couple of weeks after the ABC staff received an 11% pay rise. So 9.5%, it's a 4%, 3% and 2.5% rise over the next 3 years. It's good if you can get it, and if you work at a public broadcaster, you're going to see your wages go up.
Wow, that is just shocking that the ABC and SBS, where they don't have to compete in the commercial marketplace for advertising or viewers, they're just getting a raise. Well, good for them. As you say, nice work if you can get it. But I'm glad you mentioned the ABC, Sophie, because there's some other troubles for them. The Australian Monarchist League has called for the ABC to offer an apology and also launch an inquiry into their coverage of the coronation, which has been discussed all across this network, has frankly been completely disgraceful, was completely disgraceful. Now, Sophie, I'm going to ask you again, sorry, what did you make of the coronation coverage, just briefly, so we can get up to date with your thoughts?
So, James, I was watching it live on Saturday night. I sat there and I was prepared for a great evening. And lo and behold, the ABC turned it into a slinging match on the monarchy. It was basically a hate fest of Britain. And it was all people on there that are pro-voice campaigners. So it was very lopsided coverage. And you can only tell, James, by the way people reacted. Social media was inundated. Their talkback radio shows were inundated. The ABC have stood by this coverage. It's nothing short of disgraceful. They set out not to cover the coronation. They set out to back their political views and push their agendas and basically shame Australia for some wrongs that have definitely happened in this country. So the national broadcaster has a lot to answer for, but as usual, James, they have stood by their coverage.
And Scott, doesn't the ABC have a well-staffed editorial policies division to, keep an eye on this type of bias? Where do they keep going wrong with this?
Well, I think the institutional bias is just way too entrenched. I mean, it has been described as a green left workers collective, and this is what we see. And in this case particularly, I think it's a bit of a square up. That's my reading. The ABC's coverage of the funeral of Her Late Majesty, I think, was quite respectful. And that actually led to a huge backlash by Stan Grant and others. And clearly they put their foot down and said that this time they were going to ensure the maximum amount of disrespect towards the monarchy, our constitutional system of government, and take every opportunity to promote ABC's pet causes like The Voice and reparations and all kinds of other things. It was almost unwatchable, actually, I must say, James.
And, just to stay, I'm sorry, on the ABC, but they get $1 billion a year, so why not? Another story I report today in the Daily Telegraph. You can go to the website there, dailytelegraph.com.au, to see that 3 presenters, big ones, Pat Carvelis and others, have been busted giving promotional quotes on a book dedicated to pushing the Uluru Statement and the Aboriginal voice to Parliament. You've got Laura Tingle, Pat Carvelis, and another gentleman from Canberra. Sophie, again, this seems like more of the same. They've had biased training against this sort of thing. When are they going to pull the staff into line?
Well, that's a great story you had this afternoon, James, and yes, definitely make sure you read it. But are you surprised, James? I would be surprised if we were writing a story that there were ABC journalists putting their quotes on a book that was for the No campaign. I think we'd all fall off our seats. But this is expected at the ABC, and I really think they should just throw out their impartiality training, which they pretty much have. They are becoming a yes campaign voice. They are using using their platform to push the Yes campaign. Their journalists try and hide their bias. Look at their social media, James. It's very clear they are advocating for a yes vote. This is not the job of the public broadcaster. And I'd question why these journalists are putting their names to books that are supporting the Voice. Shouldn't they be impartial and remove themselves from this, not forgetting that they do have a charter to abide by, but that charter never seems to be enforced. So they get away with pushing their own ideological views and political agendas.
Indeed, Sophie. Now, I want to shift gears and, Scott, ask you about this here. We've got all of these stories about immigration going up, but also housing companies going bust, and the rental availability rate being something like 1% in the capital cities or less. The supply and demand curves are not matching up for housing and migration. And I want to ask you, what should the government really be doing about this? Is there anything that they can be doing to practically increase the number of people who are getting into houses besides just, throwing money around in aspirational targets?
Well, the thing is, James, the biggest policy lever that they have, that they're actually pulling at the moment, is to increase the amount of migration to Australia, over 650,000 over the 2 years. Whereas, in fact, they're making the housing market even tighter through some of their measures. The red tape, the taxes, we're not seeing the supply of housing come up. And that's why Australians are losing faith in that migration program, or at least the scale of it, because they recognise, and we've done some calculations at the IPA, and there's a shortfall of 212,000 houses across the nation over the next 5 years. We're way short of what we would need to cope with the scale of the immigration increase, and that's real issues that real Australians are concerned about, because they're seeing it as they try to get into either the rental market or the housing market. And so there is a lot that government can do, but unfortunately it's pulling the wrong levers and pulling them in the wrong direction.
Scott, you're too right. And, the huge immigration intake that we have here, it depends on trust and benefit. And I feel like they are squandering both of those things. Scott Hargraves, Sophie Elsworth, thank you so much for joining me.